Welcome, everyone, to Revolution Radio. This is the voice of the revolution. 1 minute till showtime. And greetings, Earth Explorers. Welcome to X Squared Radio. I'm your host, Brooks Agnew, coming to you live from an undisclosed location east of the Appalachian Mountains. This is where the past meets the future. In here, the results are always positive. We might go a little past your imagination, but have no fear. You will be safely traveling with us. So glad you could be here tonight. We are coming to you through the America Free Radio studios on Revolution Radio on the freedomslips.com network website. This is the largest listener-supported radio network in America, and it relies upon you for its support. So please go to revolutionradio.com or freedomslips.com and click on the donate button. That's how we keep the lights on here. I have as my guest tonight Jerry Belsky, it looks like. He is an activist with the Lyndon LaRouche movement. He has been there for over 47 years. During that time, he has organized on behalf of Mr. LaRouche's ideas in Connecticut, Virginia, Georgia, and Maryland. He has lived in Baltimore for more than 20 years. I don't know if you know what LaRouche PAC is all about, but I wrote down 4 of their tenets. And for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to go through that, and then I will bring him on at 8:15. The first one is there must be an immediate implementation of a global system of bank separation, modeled exactly on Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall Law of June 16, 1933. Under this system, the commercial banks must be put under state protection and must be completely separated by firewall from the speculative investment banks, which can no longer be allowed access to either the assets of the commercial banks or the privilege of bailouts through taxpayer money. The toxic paper of these banks, including outstanding derivatives contracts, have to be written off. Legitimate claims, which have to do with the real economy of the pensions and other assets of working people, are to be marked as valid in the new system. Some categories of demand for payments have to be frozen for the time being to be evaluated in terms of their validity by state institutions. And my response to that is, as you might know, Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagall Act in 1993, which very quickly resulted in the Lehman Brothers collapse and led to the financial collapse of 2008. Roosevelt separated the banking system from the investment industry, which isolated the risk to the value on the production and the consumption side of the exchange equation. In other words, you produce something, someone else produces something, and then you make the exchange through the banking system. using the banking system as a system of exchange. However, the placement of value in the system of exchange is the root cause of failure to meet liquidity requirements. So that's where I think Roosevelt was right in setting up the Glass-Steagall system. Number two is there has to be the creation of a national bank in every country in the tradition of Alexander Hamilton's Bank of the United States, so that state credit for productive investments can supply the physical economy with the necessary funds. The issuance of these credits must be guided by the principles of high energy flux density and an optimal increase of the productivity of the productive capacities and the powers of labor through an emphasis on scientific and technological progress. Here's where I disagree, because I disagree fundamentally with centralization of a nation's money supply. The key to safety and security, I think, is actually decentralization of the nation's money supply. That is to say, when the bank loses the money after the deposits are made, the purchases cannot be relied upon. To put it more accurately, when the bankers take the deposits from the account holders, then the community is robbed. And that is what is happening now through overdraft charges, monthly fees, all kinds of overhead that the bank itself has. As you know, you can go into any town you want to, and the two nicest buildings in town are the church and the bank, neither of which provide a service of value to the community. In other words, they don't produce anything. People use them, but only as, a go-between between what they want and where they are. So somehow the bank has made a profit on that, not just the interest of what they charge, but by the leverage of the money that people put into that bank. So I think that the decentralization of this through credit unions or various things like this is the right way to go. Roosevelt was not really the best president in the world. I'll explain. Let me get to number 3 here, and then we're going to bring Jerry on. Among the participating countries, a system of fixed parities must be established. This is rule number 3 for LaRouche PAC. And cooperation treaties must be established among sovereign states for the purpose of well-defined infrastructure and development projects. These treaties together represent factually a new Bretton Woods system, as it was intended by Roosevelt, with the explicit intention to provide credit for the industrial development of the developing sector. Now, if you've read my books, you understand that Roosevelt was an admitted fascist. And actually, he was a close associate of Mussolini. Like him, Roosevelt sought to establish a corporate government that circumvented the will of the people simply because it was effective and it was efficient. The people were actually robbed of their representation in government by the agencies that wrote and enforced the laws. He and Harry Hopkins exploded the role of government in the care and feeding of the people from cradle to grave. Today, there are over 650 federal agencies, departments, bureaus, and administrations that write our laws, they assess our taxes, they set the fees, the fines, and the enforcement actions, and we have no representation in that government, making it the purest form of tyranny. Simply defining infrastructure projects is not enough. The eminent domain powers of the corporate government may look like good and effective use of land and river, but the private ownership of these properties is foundational to America. Taking money from the taxpayer just because the parties have decided that something needs to be built is wrong. pushing people out of their cars, onto trains and shuttles is wrong, regardless of how effective government resolves that it might be. That's my general thoughts on that. Now, the fourth and final tenet is the urgent increase in the productivity of the world economy to accommodate a world population of presently almost 8 billion people must be facilitated through an international crash program for the realization of thermonuclear fusion power and other advanced technologies such as optical biophysics and life sciences in order to find solutions for challenges such as the coronavirus, as well as international cooperation in space technology and travel, which can establish the necessary next higher economic platform for the world economy, as this has been developed by the economist Lyndon LaRouche. Now, I agree with this. The key to energy lies on the moon and in the asteroid belt. Using hydrogen fusion, I think, is dangerous and costly. Using helium fusion, much safer and more effective, and it leaves no radiation behind. The polar moon craters have enough to run the Earth for thousands of years, and it's only 2 days away. It is time to stop digging up the Earth and burning it for our convenience. Too soon, the Earth will run out of its resources, and we will have ruined the planet for generations by doing so. Fusion rocketry will open the planets and then other star systems for millennia of human growth. With the advent of new educational systems superseding the traditional sit-down universities that have dominated our world for thousands of years, learning is fulfilling the measure of its creation. Every major disease will be cured. Energy needs will be met with clean, sustainable sources that will be available to everyone. Communities can be better planned and integrated with food, energy, water, employment, and housing with decentralized efficiency. Literacy and poverty will finally be eliminated from the world. War will become a distant memory. Oppression, slavery, elitism, and disparity will become a matter of individual choice rather than imposition. The moon and Mars will become viable frontiers for industry, science, and settlement. So let me go ahead and add Jerry right now. Let me make sure I get this number dialed in correctly. Hold on one moment, please. Because there is no... All right, and we'll see what happens. Jerry will join really quick. And we're calling.
Hello.
Hey, there we go, Jerry. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, good. Is this Brooks?
This is Brooks.
How are you?
We're good. We're live on the air. We'll be live until the top of the hour, and then we'll take a 3-minute break. And if you want to, we can stay through the next hour, but there's always plenty to talk about. I introduced you. Right. Talked about your 47 years with LaRouche and your expertise in this over several states. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and please tell us about LaRouche PAC.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, I've been working with Mr. LaRouche. He passed away at 96 years old, a little over a year ago. But I have worked with him since the early 1970s. And at that time, if people may remember, if they're old enough, that we had just in 71 gone off the what was called the gold reserve standard, when you had the dollar fixed to a certain price of gold. And this allowed for stability. And what Mr. LaRouche argued then is this getting rid of the Bretton Woods system, as we'd called, was going to lead, unless we changed it, to global economic warfare and fascism, a form of dictatorship in which a handful of wealthy financiers would basically try to wipe out the world economy. and here we are. So we have to change that.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Once Nixon took us off the gold system, the dollar just floated to whatever value the Federal Reserve wanted to set it to. And it didn't take long, I think really not long ago, till Jimmy Carter, we saw inflation out the roof like nothing this country's ever seen before. And I think the only reason we kind of got it under control was what allowed us to get it under control when Reagan became president? Why did interest rates and inflation start coming down?
Well, unfortunately, we really didn't get it under control. It only appeared to be. What they did was they went into more financial speculation. In fact, during the 70s, this was a deliberate plan to destroy the economy. And they used Carter for this. But I'm sure you remember Mr. LaRouche attacked the Trilateral Commission. You had all these various agencies of oligarchs and elite groups, but really based in England. And they had a policy. They openly called this during the 70s. This was coined by the Council on Foreign Relations, which was controlled disintegration. So during the 70s, they deliberately destroyed the economy. You remember the high interest rates of Volcker and wiping out industry. And then they moved to a new system, and that was involved massive speculation. You did have the financial crash, which LaRouche called actually directly a few months before, 1987, the stock market crashed.
Mm-hmm.
They moved into more speculation and bubbles. So it really was not under control. It's just that they created a bigger casino, shall we say, which kept threatening to collapse. And every time it threatened to collapse, they created a bigger bubble. Finally, they had to get rid of the Glass-Steagall law itself and allow banks to be totally taken over by this casino economy, which led to the crash of 2008. So we never had it under control.
Yeah, I agree with that. When the banks were allowed to merge, or at least allowed to buy or be bought by insurance companies or the securities dealers, what you really had was the fox guarding the hen house. You had speculation then happening with depositors' money. And when Lehman Brothers crashed, it really sucked the bottom out of everything. I think the only thing that saved us, and this was really prior to the early 90s, the only thing that saved us was the fact that mortgage-backed securities seemed to kind of hold their value. Single-family homes were still owned by single families. But in the early 90s, those regulations changed. And once President Clinton removed the last tenet of Glass-Steagall in 1993, it allowed the banks to then make basically unsecured loans to people who really didn't have the ability to pay to buy houses. Now, they were still putting together the mortgage-backed securities, groups of single-family homes put together to make like $5 million slices in a sandwich, so to speak. And they were underwritten by FHA, just like always, except that all the rules were relaxed. So when those homeowners stopped making their payments, those mortgage-backed securities became junk bonds. And that's what built up to the crash in 2008, I think.
Well, that's true. But what do people think is going to happen now?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you've tried to get a home loan recently, but it's not very easy. You have to have a down payment, you have to have credit, you have to have time on the job, all the things that normally make, a good buyer, a good reliable buyer. However, the job market for the last, I'd say, maybe 5 or 6 years has been very, very good until the last 30 days when we had like 7 million people dumped on the unemployment market.
Right.
Well, now but what's going to happen?
What has not been resolved, though.
No, it hasn't.
What the period you're talking about is they have sold, they've basically financialized, securitized, that's the word, all of this debt so that the mortgage-backed securities, mortgages are bundled, sold as securities, then those are bet upon as derivatives. There's a massive, gigantic speculative bubble that's bigger than it was when it crashed in 2008. It's a gigantic bubble that can't be sustained.
Well,
Mr. LaRouche had long argued we have to decide, are we going to save people or are we going to try to save the bubble? And if we try to save the bubble, it won't work, but we'll end up getting rid of the people.
Well, we actually have 3 bubbles. Now, you talk about derivatives. Let's talk about that one first. You say gigantic. Kind of put that in perspective. What kind of number are we talking about? Gigantic for the home loan?
Really, let me put it this way: nobody knows, but the best figure we've come up with is something like 1.5 trillion, basically quadrillion. So it's you're talking about 1,500 trillion, maybe 2 trillion. Nobody really knows because these are off the books. A lot of it is, it's not regulated. A lot of it's secret, but it's a gigantic Ponzi scheme that it dwarfs what people think of as debt, as the so-called official debt. It's beyond that. Now, if you implement Glass-Steagall right now, which is what we since the last crash, you would automatically render all of this worthless. Now, people get afraid of that when you start saying that, because then they say, well, what do we do? You got to reorganize the whole system. You have to basically say, we're going to put people first, keep them in their homes, keep the banks functioning. You just separate the legitimate part of banking, which is deposits and loans, from which all of these investments were made under the original Glass-Steagall law. It was illegal for obvious reasons. How could you have FDIC insurance if the banks were speculating on the very markets that had crashed in 1929?
That's right. That's right.
It was a good reason that if you're going to give people insurance, you had to say the banks cannot do this. Now, if you want to be an investment bank under that law, you could speculate, but you could not get insurance from the federal government to
that's
do
correct.
it. So it was a pretty good banking law.
That's correct.
If you impose Glass-Steagall now, you would wipe out all this nominal wealth, which is just on a computer screen. It's not real. But you would have to, and this is what LaRouche has insisted from the beginning, you have to then set up a new credit system where either you take over the Federal Reserve and stop them from printing money to bail out Wall Street and the City of London, and you instead issue credit, as Alexander Hamilton did right at the beginning of the country, Lincoln did with greenbacks. But the money you issue is a debt, but it goes to the real physical economy, which today would mean healthcare, emergency action, whatever's needed to stop this virus. And then that means infrastructure as well, plus loans to get businesses functioning. That type of debt can be paid if you're actually putting people to work building something new and productive.
Yeah, because there's value on the other side of the equation. When you're talking about derivatives, you're talking about using the future value of like if you buy a house on a 30-year payments, 360 payments times your interest, that's the future value of that loan. But that's rarely achieved. Most people don't own a home for 30 years and pay that loan off. They own it for 5 or 6 or 7 years and then they sell it, or the bank sells the mortgage and takes a service release premium. That value is never actually realized. However, it's used as leverage to borrow more money and to sell more money. And that's where the derivatives came from. And I know it's a staggering number. It used to be like $660 trillion. And now you're saying it's like $1,500 trillion. That's crazy. I mean, the gross domestic product of the United States of America is just under $23 trillion a year.
Right. This has no connection to reality.
Exactly.
So why are we trying to bail that out?
We'll never do it. But there are 2 other bubbles.
Exactly.
The other bubbles
but if you try to bail it out, you'll destroy the dollar.
Yeah, exactly. And that may be the plan. But the other bubbles are.
I'm quite certain that some people already plan that. Yes, that's true.
And you have 2 other bubbles. One is the car loan bubble, and the other is the student loan debt bubble. Both of these bubbles are over $1 trillion.
No, it's the same bubble. They're all part of the same bubble because what they're doing is securitizing all debt. They're selling them as, securities. Then they're betting on that. So they're doing the same thing with the student loans and the car debt that they did with the mortgage-backed securities. And you remember what Einstein said, if you keep doing the same thing and think you're going to get a different result, that's the definition of insanity. Why would you believe that creating a bigger bubble is going to have any better result than what we saw 12 years ago?
Well, because it gets the bankers who are ready to retire now their bonuses, and then they're out of the system. and the politicians.
Well, it's not a very good strategy, especially, come back to this question of the virus we're facing. You can't really separate dealing with that and dealing with this virus, this financial virus, because you can't mobilize what's needed to deal with the disease we're facing unless you get a control of this economy. So all of the discussion that many people thought that, we're having is, interesting, but you really can't change the situation. If you don't, you can't defeat the virus. So it's really a matter of now life and death. We have to reorganize the system now, what we should have done 12 years ago.
Well, now what do we do? I mean, we are to the point now where the president, I think, has a good window of opportunity to take over the Fed. So what if Lyndon LaRouche were alive today, what would he advise President Trump to do once he takes control of the Fed?
Stop bailing out Wall Street. It's fake. We're dealing with fake debt. People shouldn't think their livelihoods depend on this. It's like clinging to the Titanic and not getting in the lifeboat. Take over the Fed or turn it into a national bank like Hamilton did, and use the issue of credit to mobilize the economy now. Glass-Steagall, first step. National Bank, second step. Issue the credit to build an immediate healthcare system. And you would have to do this, unlike the original Glass-Steagall, it's not going to work just in America. You would have to, and this is what LaRouche did want, this is what he advised for many years. You have to set up a four-power agreement between the U.S., Russia, China, and India to break the financial control of especially the City of London and their allies on Wall Street, because they run the global financial system.
And so what would you? This is like an SDR, like a strategic drawing rights bond. What would you back it with?
The credit is actually backed, like you said, the future production. That is the credit. You're going to build for the future, for human beings to be more productive. Now, we're not just talking about investing in what we already know, but you have to have a crash science program developing new technology, because you always have to be thinking in terms of the future. So to make it concrete, we're talking about immediately a crash mobilization to build a global defense, to win the war against the virus. And the only way you can do that, since you're talking about building hospitals immediately, obviously we're starting with these ventilators, the masks, all that stuff, retooling plant, whatever it takes. And then if you just begin to think, well, wait a minute, this virus is worldwide. You can't just stop it in the United States. You would have to stop it in Africa, where it's going to spread, even worse than what we see here in the United States.
Well, maybe. I don't know if this particular virus would spread in Africa, because much of Africa is taking hydrochloroquine. So they're not going to get the virus.
Well, that can be used as an antiviral, one of many that are being proposed.
Mm-hmm. But because they're taking,
I don't believe it'll stop it.
Well, they're taking anti-malarial. They're taking anti-malarial drugs, which this particular virus, it can't divide. It can't get a foothold and start dividing the way it normally does.
Sure. There's a lot of things we don't know yet. I wouldn't be so confident about that. But I can tell you that combine this, it's not only this virus, but Mr. LaRouche had warned for years that the financial policies that we were just discussing would have a worse impact all over the world. Ultimately, they would increase mass death and create the conditions for mass pandemics. This is what he warned about back in the 70s, that if you lowered the standard of living, which was the policy as they shut down industry and manufacturing in the United States, they were lowering the standard of living around the world. And in fact, Mr. LaRouche argued that the real metric for an economy is not how much money you may have. I mean, you could have, you could make, as I say, you could have 1.5 quadrillion of derivatives and they're worth nothing because they don't produce anything. But what is the market basket you need to keep people alive at a higher standard of living? How many people can you support? And that depends on your level of technology. And what these guys argued, the exact same people, by the way, who argue for this financial bubble, they also say, we really can't support that many people. I wonder why. You know, we're not investing in technology or infrastructure or science. Of course you're going to lower the standard of living, and you're going to end up killing people. So Mr. LaRouche's argument was that this will lead ultimately to mass disease, lowering of the standard of living, increase of the death rates, and ultimately, just as in any system, you have to have an energy of the system, maintain that energy, constantly create new technology to create more energy. And if you lower the standard, you will create conditions where diseases and viruses that are there always would be able to mutate and actually create new diseases or bring old diseases back. So I wouldn't be confident that this thing's not going to spread it. In fact, you could not do the kind of social, distancing and stuff we're talking about in Africa because they just don't have the facilities or the capability by themselves to sustain that type of approach. You would have to mass produce hospitals and equipment and infrastructure. Then you're talking electricity. Out goes the Green New Deal. You're talking about building power plants, water systems. I mean, this is an immense mobilization. And that's what it's going to take to rebuild the economy as well.
Well, and the other thing that you're talking about here, and Lyndon talked about this a lot, was taking these major powers, China, India, the United States, and Russia, and forming working treaties between these powers so that they can work as one financial body. Now, Lyndon used to always call this the Silk Road, and I think China has kind of adopted that Silk Road verbiage.
Correct.
But it hasn't really been used to benefit America. In fact, it's been used to kind of squeeze America out of the market, and we've watched that over the last 20 years. I know I participated in it because I helped box up some of this manufacturing equipment and ship it to China because they were the ones with the cash. They were the ones buying, and we were the ones selling. And now we find ourselves in the 21st century.
Didn't call you up and they didn't tell people they had to do this. China was approached by the financial elites here and told that's going to be the new system. And they didn't create it. They didn't tell us to shut down our industry. But on the other hand, they made a change in their policy. I mean, they did go along with this. They did build up their economy on that basis. But then at a certain point in the late 90s, and certainly by the 20 years ago, they moved into high technology, infrastructure, scientific discoveries, and they even approached the LaRouche organization and asked our advice. And we had made a proposal for the new Silk Road to be the basis for restructuring the entire world economy in the 90s, after the Soviet system had fallen. And the Chinese were very interested in that idea. And the idea was that we would build, like Lincoln did, along the routes of railroad networks, high-speed rail, cities and infrastructure along the routes, and invest in that and build up the real physical economy. And they officially launched this new Silk Road about 7 years ago, 2013, the end of 2013. Mm-hmm. They call it now the Belt and Road. But they've invited the U.S. to join. And in fact, to build, this is already beginning. These projects have begun around the world, but without the United States, it's not going to work as a global economic mobilization, and certainly without reorganizing the financial system. So that the potential is there tremendous, except that is the real reason why China has been under attack. And that is really the potential for that is really the reason why Trump has been under attack. Because when he came in, he said, you know, it makes sense. I'd like to have better relations with Russia. Then he said, I'd like to have better relations with China. I'd like to end these wars, and I'd like to build infrastructure. And that's all good. And he got attacked. Why? Because just the threat of saying that and wanting to do it meant the potential for him to do what LaRouche had called for.
Yeah, that's
that
exactly right.
Been under attack.
Yeah. Him saying America first, it didn't mean America only. It just meant America first. And when he said,
precisely,
well, look, I know you've been saying Russia's our enemy, and the Soviets certainly were, but he's saying, look, if it's possible, I'd like to try to get along with them. And that was like an act of war in Washington, D.C.
Exactly.
And you saw this when the Mueller report was going on, and then we went to Russia, and then the hearings began. You saw all the diplomats, all of the professional bureaucrats that came forward through this. They all hated Russia. They really did. And what they tried to do is put their hooks into Trump to try to sink him with their hatred of Russia, because Trump was actually really trying to get along with Russia, trying to make something happen with Russia and also make something happen with China. It looks like he is making it happen with China, but China got themselves crossways, I think, in this trade war. And they needed an out. They had two things they had to accomplish, and they had to do it in pretty short order. First, I think they had to end the protests against globalism. They were happening in Hong Kong, in France, in Iran, and some places in China. These things were beginning to build, and they had to end it. And they tried everything. They gassed these people. They beat them. They shot them. They started hauling them to jail. Nothing would clear the streets of these protests. These yellow vest people rioted for months, and there was just no way to beat them. And the second thing they needed to do is China needed to utterly smash the Trump economy. And they did both in less than 3 weeks. That's unbelievable.
I don't think they want to smash the Trump economy. I think the problem is they weren't sure who's really running the United States. I think they wanted to work with Trump. If you remember, they want relations with Trump, but you have within the Trump administration the same neocons. I mean, he's had to fire several of them. But, you have, frankly, look, you have a lot of confusion because of the news media. And the media, it's not simply the liberal media. I mean, that clearly has gone crazy, against Trump. But within the Fox News circuit, you have people who are very much anti-China. They're both being controlled by this British ideology that it's us versus them. That's the geopolitics. You can't manipulate the world unless you divide and conquer. You play everyone against each other. So the trick is, how do you do what Trump said at the UN was, the future belongs not to the globalists, but to the patriots. But he's referring to every country.
Sure.
How do you get nations to work together for a common interest that's in the interest of every nation? You have to go with this new credit system that builds up the real economy. And it's not something that's based on free trade where you just simply see what happens. You work out agreements.
Yeah.
You say, okay, this is what we need. This is what you need. How do we both benefit? China is perfectly willing to engage in that type of, they may use the term globalization, but their attitude is win-win cooperation, whereas the British view of globalization is frankly destroy everybody. So what we have, thing about this virus, I just want to come back to this. It forces us to reorganize the economy. We could be arguing for a long time how the economy should run, but at this point, there is no choice. The reason why I'm insisting, even this, whatever we use in antiviral species in Africa is not going to stop the spread of the virus. It may help treat the patients, yes, but I wouldn't simply dismiss this thing. Once it spreads in Africa, it's going to be, this thing is going to come back in waves in the United States as well. So you have to have a mass mobilization to stop it all over the world. And the only way you can build the medical equipment, the hospitals, and the infrastructure, and really reverse. I mean, as bad as what they did to the United States over the last, 50 years since the 70s, since we changed the economy, it's been far worse in other parts of the planet. So the only way you could deal with that is you would have to declare war on this virus and say, we're going to build whatever is needed, and we're not going to bail out this system. You can't do both.
Well, I mean, the only difference I have in opinion is I don't think you can stop a virus. I think what you can do is make it as easy as possible for the human body to build antibodies to this virus, which is easy to do. I mean, people do it in just a few days. But then the body has to get over the symptoms. You have to get over the histamine reaction and the pneumonia that develops. But we have drugs for that. I think the cure to this is us. We're the cure. We always have been. We walk around in a sea of viruses and microbes all the time. I mean, they've been trying to wipe us out since the dawn of time, and we're still here. The key to making this not come back in waves is herd immunity. Absolutely. Every virologist agrees with that.
Well, what they would like to do is develop a vaccine. But right now, in view of that, the idea of what China did work. I mean, I know the media wants to make people think they're making up these figures, but, it does work. Now, they took extreme measures. Now they're being attacked for not starting earlier. Well, it's the same reason Trump is being attacked, by the way. Well, if we'd started earlier, sure, if you started at day one, but you're not sure exactly what you're dealing with initially. But what China did on January 23rd is they locked down the entire city of Wuhan, and they tested people. That required, they had to have the capability to produce the tests. You can see how difficult it is initially to have mass production of tests, masks, equipment, everything. And initially they had a problem, but they ramped up the production. They tested people, and they did not send people who were positive back home. They actually put and this was not a prison. This was quarantine. They were taken care of, but they were, quarantined for 2 weeks, and then they were released. But the idea was to keep everybody separate. Now, you can give them antiviral drugs under those conditions, but while they're contagious, you want to separate people. That is a massive undertaking. I mean, you can see people trying to do this in the U.S. We've only tested people that seem to have the symptoms. We have not quarantined people in other facilities. I mean, we're now beginning to build, special hospitals with the Army Corps of Engineers, the military. This would actually be far more productive than all these wars we've been involved in. They could do miracles.
Yeah, but those
right?
hospitals have already been dismantled because they never even treated a single patient. What we did was
China,
we quarantined healthy people. We didn't quarantine sick people. We quarantined healthy people. That's what happened. That's why the growth of the virus slowed down. But we also have...
That's exactly what I'm saying is you quarantine people but we did not quarantine them who were, first of all, let me put it this way. We sent people home and we told them to stay home. What I'm saying the Chinese did in Wuhan, they did something a little different, is they actually quarantined people in separate facilities. They didn't send them home. You want to stop the spread. Now, this is a massive economic mobilization. You have to build special facilities, take over hotels, convert, as we're doing in some cases by the Army Corps of Engineers, convention centers and other sports facilities to hospitals. It's a big job. But if you're going to do that around the world, you're talking about something, that makes the Marshall Plan look minor. But see, what we're talking about is even beyond just stopping the virus. We've got to be prepared for any future thing like this.
Yeah,
what we're calling for now.
Well, I was going to say that if this virus was really like the 1917, 1918 virus, we'd have a real problem on our hands, same as we did then. That was a virus that was really devastating. People died within within 12 hours of showing symptoms, they were dying. Their eardrums were bursting. They had blood coming out of their eyes. That was a really, really bad virus. That was the Spanish flu. This one is not like that. It comes on quick, gets into your lungs, and you could develop pneumonia pretty quickly and really damage your lungs. That's what the Z-Paks are for, to stop the pneumonia from growing. But the trouble is that early on, we didn't know how to treat it, and there was a lot of misinformation going around. And I think the evidence is now becoming very clear that the World Health Organization was working against trying to find a cure, and actually looks like trying to get as many people infected as possible, which is crazy. It's insane, but that's exactly what was going on.
Why do you say that?
Well, because the evidence is clear. Every single thing the World Health Organization told us to do was wrong. Keep the borders open. Don't quarantine people. This is not transmissible human to human. They were totally off the mark.
I see what you mean. Yeah. Well, initially it wasn't known, but I think at this point, let's go for the. You always want to prepare for the worst, so therefore. You have to do whatever is necessary. Now, if we're going to take the measures that were initially taken, were taken by the Chinese in Wuhan worldwide, that requires a massive mobilization to build the hospitals, to build the quarantine facilities, you can see how difficult it's been to build the test kits, the equipment, the ventilators. You have to mobilize like you're at war. That means you can't simultaneously allow the Fed to print the money to bail out, what these guys want to do in the Fed and the major banks is use this as an excuse to bail out their system. No, put the money into a massive infrastructure program. Now, if we were to work because this is too big just for one country, if you were to work with China, with Russia, and India, as we're restructuring the entire economy to build what's needed, you could actually stop this disease all over the world and lay the basis for a new health system where you've built hospitals, machinery, equipment, infrastructure in Africa and Asia. And by the way, what I've just described, that would be like a health Silk Road. It would be the equivalent of rebuilding the world economy.
Well, the issue is on a normal basis, day to day, month to month, decade to decade, you need about one hospital bed for every 1,000 people in your community, which is about the burden that a community can handle. And that's basically what we had in this country and other countries, about one bed for every 1,000 people. However, those beds normally are used for other illnesses, kidney disease, heart disease, elective surgeries, all that kind of stuff. We're not doing any of that now, none of that. And these hospitals are empty. Empty. I have friends of mine in the healthcare industry, and they're twiddling their thumbs. They're doing nothing. Now, the Walmarts are full, the TJ Maxxes are full, the Costco's are full, but the hospitals are empty, and they need to get back to work doing healthcare.
You're talking about right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, because we're in an emergency, but I'll tell you, we used to have a much higher percentage. We would go back to the Hill-Burton standard, which was set up after World War II, where the idea was this was not, like a hotel thing where you want to figure out how much occupancy you have. You want to have excess capacity in case of any emergency. And they had a standard after World War II, which might shock people, but it took 30 years to build to it. But the idea was through government grants, loans, federally guaranteed loans, and to actually go with 4.5 beds. But the fact of the matter is, you want to be prepared for any emergency, because when you have one, like now, like we see, it's what you don't have, what you didn't build. We've shut down hundreds of hospitals. But then, if you look at around the country, it's even worse, because in the rural areas, as you know, where the idea was to have a community hospital there in every county, you have places that don't have health care.
Well, and a lot of hospitals stopped having emergency rooms. They became clinics because of the liability and the malpractice of having an emergency room. So we started going to dock-in-a-boxes, the fast meds and the urgent cares, and there's probably 12 of them here in our little town right here, and they got plenty of nurse practitioners, plenty. But that takes the place of the emergency room. All the stitches, all the puncture wounds and stuff like that would normally go to the emergency room go to these clinics. They're cheaper, they're more efficient, they don't have full-time doctors. Right. They have all the equipment necessary, and these big hospitals, they run without emergency rooms, and they operate more, on the clinical side of it. In other words, oncology and hematology and stuff like that. More. Okay,
well, that's fine too. But in a lot of places, they don't even have that anymore because we've been taking down these hospitals all over the country.
Sure.
When we could not. They were no longer profitable, quote unquote.
Right.
So there's actually, something to be said about preparing for emergencies.
And the crazy thing, one of my friends brought this up today. In the old days, the drug reps, the pharmaceutical companies, they went to the doctors. They briefed the doctors on what the drugs could do or not do, all the drug interactions, all that stuff. Nowadays, they sell the drugs to the patient over the TV. Every single ad you see on most of the news programs and half the movie channels are about different drugs. Ask your doctor about this one, that one, this one. Who are we? We don't know nothing about drugs, and we're going to go try and sell our doctor on a new drug that's going to, fix our scaly skin or our brittle bones. Wow. The pharmaceutical industry has become a multi-trillion-dollar behemoth. And the bad part is that they really step hard on all the homeopathic stuff. Homeopathic doctors are dying right and left, and you have to have this crazy disclaimer, that this will neither prevent, treat, or cure any disease. But it might. I mean, vitamin C is good for you, right? No, not according to the pharmaceutical industry. It's worthless.
Right. Yeah, I think you can't trust those guys, definitely.
Well, I think they've become the 800-pound gorilla in the healthcare business. They're the ones making all the money, and they're the ones keeping people treated instead of cured.
Well, yeah, you're making a point. Well, look at a lot of them got into this whole opioid thing, so that's led to.
Wow.
But I think we have to start to see the key thing is it's the same thing with the economy. What is our objective? And we would go back to the whole intent of the Constitution. Promote the general welfare, not the financial interests of a few people.
I agree with that. And I think in a lot of respects, we've gotten away from the Constitution, and the federal government is doing way, way more than it was originally designed to do. We've corrupted the Commerce Clause, and we've allowed all these agencies and bureaus to take over everything, write our laws and assess our taxes, and we don't even know these people. That's a government we have no representation in, but it sure is big, and it sure spends all of our money.
Well, what LaRouche used to say is, look, it's not so much the size, it's the question of what's the intent. And even the Constitution is not as complicated as people think. We would start with the preamble, promote the general welfare. That has to be and look, Hamilton he was the key figure in developing the Constitution. He had no problem with a strong government, but his attitude was the government must serve the people. That's why he insisted you have to control the credit to provide the means to carry out your constitutional responsibility.
Right.
If you turn money over to simply some private group of people, you'll be enslaved by money. But you have to have credit. If you're going to say we want to build the general welfare, well, how are you going to provide people with the means to build infrastructure, manufacturing, jobs, and this sort of thing?
Well, I don't know that if it's government's job to create all that. I think that's what I love about the Trump administration is, at least I'm in the manufacturing business, they got out of our way. They pulled a lot of regulations out of our way. We were actually able to do what we do best.
Clearly, that's the intent. If your intention is you want to make it possible, because a lot of these regulations were designed like these environmental things, were designed to actually shut down manufacturing. The whole environmentalist lobby and the Green New Deal and all that stuff is run by these financial circles out of London. Their intention is to shut it down and, frankly, get rid of people. That's their argument. We can't support you. So they created this whole mythology about how we're destroying the climate.
It is.
But besides doing that, which I think is clearly what Trump wants to do, is you have to have the means for credit. Now, it doesn't mean the government, it can print the money through some credit mechanism, which is needed to build what's necessary. And right now, once again, if you come back just to the health question, you have got to build the facilities. You can't just say, we're going to give you a drug. Even to have the necessary drugs, you have to build factories. But you have to have the facilities, the equipment, the machinery.
Jerry, we're going to take a quick break. Let's let these 3 minutes of commercials run, and we'll be right back with more X Squared Radio right after this.
All right.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Hello, my name is Mr. Rowe. I am the host of Reality Extraction, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I utilize logic, intellect, and magic to methodically atomize, vivisect, analyze, examine, study, scrutinize, and extract an essence of reality from a fog of illusion and confusion. You can find me on Studio B every Thursday, 1700 hours Pacific Time. That's 8 p.m. Eastern. No topic taboo, no subject too strange. I strive to take a neutral standpoint during the dissection of the topic at hand. That's Reality Extraction with Mr. Rowe on Revolution Radio.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Transcending time and space, let us take you to the place inside your mind where thoughts divide and mysteries unwind. Join us every Monday evening right here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And you will catch the Fenton Perspective with our great host, Lorian Fenton. Come listen in as she shares her amazing stories from the past to present, along with all of her guest secrets to the future. That's the Fenton Perspective every Monday evening right here from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Revolution Radio. Oh, and you don't need to expect us. We're already here.
narco-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a simple majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound. I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity. I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live, Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us. Here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
All right, welcome back to X Squared Radio. This is the final hour. My guest tonight is Gerald. Is it Belsky or Belinsky?
Belsky.
Belsky. Okay, I've got it right. So we in the first hour we talked about the value of credit, and it's a word that's sometimes thrown around loosely, but I think where it means the most for Americans anyway is the availability of credit for startups. Right now, we are at the lowest rate of startup companies in the United States than we have ever been, and I mean since the year 1675. Now, established companies are there, and certainly there are credit facilities that are in place for companies that have been in business for 2 or 3 years and showing a profit. There's all kinds of SBA loans, SBIR grants, all that, but nothing for startups. Investors have absolutely disappeared like zombie land. You know, they have disappeared. So what would you recommend for all of the smart guys and girls out there in their basements and garages and attics that have developed great ideas, have wonderful technologies, energy, storage devices, efficiency devices, robotics, programs, but they don't have the money to get started? Where does the credit come from? How do we facilitate that new technology coming to market?
There's got to be a total change in the paradigm. That's why. I mean, frankly, you were talking about companies that have credit that are established. A lot of these companies, frankly, are considered zombie companies because the level of corporate debt is now approaching the level of the mortgage bubble, 12 years ago. You have a lot of companies that are right on the edge of financial bankruptcy.
And the ones that are borrowing money are buying back their own stock.
Right. That's what I mean by a zombie company. They could not actually exist except through these financial manipulations. And we're reaching the end of the line. So rather than looking at it from what does the individual do to get the credit to start up, you got to change the whole geometry they're operating in. It's like being, on the Titanic and, thinking how I'm going to, start my company. You got to get off the ship. You got to get a new system. And what we're talking about is a combination of what Hamilton did, what Lincoln did, what Franklin Roosevelt did, who frankly modeled what he did on Lincoln, and Lincoln modeled what he did on Hamilton. I mean, there are many ways you can do this, but you've got to issue credit for production that is going to increase the physical standard of living with new technology and new infrastructure. I mean, people know that the level of infrastructure in the U.S., I remember talking to various engineers, they came up with studies that said we've got a $4 trillion deficit just in repairing the existing infrastructure, as people can see driving around or going over bridges or whatever. You don't even know which bridges are about to collapse, till they fall down. But you got to build new infrastructure. We're talking high-speed rail. Maglev would be a very good down the road type of technology, but new credit for new infrastructure. you've got to have an overall game plan with the United States. That's why this alliance between the U.S., Russia, China, and India would work. If you're going to rebuild the infrastructure all over the world, which has been allowed to collapse, you're talking high-speed rail. I mean, do look at China. They've done a lot of this. They've done this in China. They'd like to extend it, but, clearly we could be part of that. We could be building high-speed rail, nuclear power plants. A lot of these small modular reactors could be built. In fact, if you just figure out what would we need for healthcare, you would have to be building thousands of these reactors just to provide the electricity. You'd have to create new water systems. But then when you talk about going into outer space and launching a mission to the moon and then Mars, you're talking about applying the new technologies you develop right here on Earth as well. So those people who can come up with analog breakthroughs, they were small, engineering firms that were willing to make discoveries, and they needed the credit to do it. We had a lot of these companies that were spun off of the space program. We need that type of ingenuity. So the question is, where's the credit going to come from? That is where the government should put the credit. You can give credit to a national bank, for example, or you could set up a credit facility while we're building the infrastructure to give credit to companies that are going to make the country more productive. And a lot of this new technology in robotics and, artificial intelligence can be applied for something good. We've been, unfortunately, using a lot of this stuff for something bad, like spying on everybody, but you could use it for something good.
Yeah, I talk to bankers as little as possible because it gives me a rash, but the idea of meeting the credit needs of the community is something that has been forgotten by banks and credit unions for a long time. I mean, they're perfectly willing to open you a new checking account or loan you money to buy a car, but you want to open money to open or to build a shop of some kind, to make cabinets or to repair cars or to fix potholes, in the road, or to clean water or something like that. To them, that is a risk. And you see, I feel the same way that you do. I think that's actually the lowest risk. When you loan money to a company at very low rates, and the board of that company uses that money to buy shares back off the public market, which basically boosts the price of the shares, which they own. It's sort of like paying off your house with your credit card, but that is a company that is 80, 90, sometimes 200 times earnings. But when you're loaning money to a company to get started, to open a beauty shop or some kind of coatings plant or an anodizing plant, something that has 10 or 12 or 13 employees, that's closer to 1-to-1. In other words, you're loaning the money to a company that's worth the money. And even if 90% of them go broke, all that money is spent in the local community. It goes around and around and goes right back into the bank. There's no risk, really. But when you loan...
that is the way banking used to work. What you're describing is a local bank who would know the people in the community. He could judge this, and they would lend the money. That was the purpose. But once you turn the banking system into a casino, the idea was, how can you make the biggest return as opposed to lending money to make a real, general contribution to the community? And,
and in fact,
the local bank couldn't do this just if you by themselves. There has to be. That's why you need Glass-Steagall. You have to have a total restructuring of the system. But I'll tell you how this thing could work, though.
Okay.
See, if you start from the top, if you start from the bottom, it looks pretty bad. How are we going to do this? It's so big. You have to start with a big mission. That's why it seems like in wartime you can get things done that seemed impossible beforehand. But if you launch a war on this disease and you launch a war against the real physical breakdown, what Trump tried to address with infrastructure and manufacturing. But think about this on a world scale. There is so much work to do to build the infrastructure we need to raise the standard of living and keep people alive that you would have to issue the credit. And if you issue the credit for the infrastructure projects, that creates the environment where the local banker that say, okay, we now have credit in our banks to lend for productive purposes. We're not going to lend it to you to, gamble on the stock market.
Right.
In fact, you combine that with what Kennedy did with the investment tax credit. He gave people tax breaks if they invested, not to buy their own stock, but to build plants and equipment.
And they had to leave the money in there.
Break.
They had to leave the money in there for a little bit, and what he did is give them a holiday on the capital gains tax. But there's the laws that prevent banks from doing that are the Dodd-Frank laws. They've actually made
rid of it.
Yeah, they've made it illegal.
That was done to stop Glass-Steagall. That Dodd-Frank bill was done, and we were leading the charge in the Congress to go with Glass-Steagall. So they came up with this Dodd-Frank thing because they knew that they had to look like they were doing something, but it was all fake. It made it worse. Now,
Glass-Steagall was developed in 1933, and it held almost intact until probably the mid-'80s, and the last of Glass-Steagall was repealed by Bill Clinton in 1993. If you had to do...
It was actually 99, but they were working on it. You're right. They kept whittling it away, so only a little bit left.
So if you had to do Glass-Steagall again today, knowing what we know, how would you craft it? How would you get it passed?
Same thing. You'd say right now, this financial system is ready to crash. It was going to crash before the virus. This is just being used as the excuse to say, let's get a new bailout. No, you can't bail this thing out. You have to reorganize the system, protect what's legitimate, protect the banks, exactly the qualities of the banks you just described, protect that capability to lend to local communities, to protect people's deposits. And the only way you can protect the value of the dollar is if you were lending money to build up the real economy. If you try to save this bubble, you will wipe out the system.
Yeah,
and there
I agree
with that. There are people who know this, by the way. There was a discussion last summer. You might have heard about this at Jackson Hole. They have this meeting every year, the Fed. And last summer, it was not like some secret meeting. I mean, this was openly publicized. The head of the Bank of England, exactly as we've said, they're the top dog with the City of London. Mark Carney, who also was the head of the Green Finance Initiative, pushing the Green New Deal, he publicly said we're going to have to replace the dollar as the reserve currency with a very radical proposal for central bank issued digital currency, where they would issue their own money and tell the government how to spend it.
And we're not for that.
That was last summer, this back August. And you had the PAC, which is the largest, manager, they claim, of, funds in the world, several $1 trillion, I think, of investment funds. And they were being praised by Carney because what they were proposing was what they called monetary regime change, where we're going to just go with helicopter money, hand out the money, and this is how we will now keep the financial system. So they expected a collapse. But if they do what they're proposing to do, they will destroy the dollar. So you're not going to build anything. You just wipe out the currency, create some new currency, and say we're the ones who get it. So they'd end up killing more people than the virus with this method.
So what's the solution? What is the solution?
Governments, this is why you got to get 4 governments together to say, okay, we're going to see what's in the interest of all our countries. We're going to use a Glass-Steagall policy worldwide. We're going to protect people, but not this investment bubble. It's coming down. Okay, then what we have to do is protect people from the crash by putting the credit into the real economy. Now, you can't issue credit unless you have stable currencies. You have to guarantee trade, that people know what their currency is worth. Because the way they built up the bubble, by the way, over the last 50 years was not just inside the U.S., but by devaluing them, betting against them. So essentially, no government was controlling their own currency or credit.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So you get the 4 countries together, and they agree to work with, at least on a hierarchy basis, one credit facility and undo this untenable debt
every country,
bubble.
would be able to issue their own credit. I mean, we don't want to get rid of national. So
I see.
We'll have agreements between countries. That's true, but it's you have to.
There are some countries
that have a credit mechanism, but you wouldn't work out agreement that we will, be able to have a stable currency system that was in everybody's interest.
There are some entities
and work out long-term agreements to trade internationally, build big projects.
Look,
the details can be a little complicated, and I don't want to make it sound like that's simple. But on the other hand, the principles, I think, are pretty simple.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, you got to think of it this way, too. At the end of the day, there's a small number of entities that have ended up with this hot potato. Saudi Arabia, China, and, of course, the Fed. The Fed has a big chunk of this hot potato. So if Trump takes over the Fed, and the Fed basically, I think, merges with the Treasury, is that what you see happening? And basically just write off the whole thing.
Well, let me put it this way. That's what I think should happen, but I don't think people should be so, shall we say, sanguine and say, oh, it's all a done deal. Trump is caught in the middle in all this.
Oh, yeah.
I think he wants to, but yeah, this is a big deal if you're taking on the Federal Reserve and the financial and Wall Street in London. I don't think yet he's made that decision that you're saying, because he is still trying to bail Wall Street while he's also trying to save the country.
Oh, sure.
The point I would make is you can't do both. You cannot bail out this system. You got to make a decision. We're going to put it through bankruptcy. That's what Glass-Steagall and the National Bank would mean. Would mean saying all this debt, all these so-called investments, they're not real. We're going to protect what's real first. Now, when you're in a crisis, what we're calling for is freeze these markets, figure out what's real. It's like when Roosevelt shut down the banks and they sent in auditors to figure out which banks, what were the assets that were good, what were bad, keep the ones that are open we can, issue new credit. But the key thing was to put things back to work to get things moving again.
Right.
In many cases, you will figure out you'll find out these debts are worth nothing. But we're talking about putting the system through bankruptcy. I wish it were the case. Trump has not made that decision to do it. That is a big deal. That's really what he's got to do. And it's really too big just for the U.S. You have to have the support of other countries to say, well, okay, we're creating a new system. We're going to wipe out this fake debt, but we're going to protect people. And for the moment, we're in a crisis. We got to put things back to work. We got to deal with this virus. We got to build up whatever's needed, new health system. We'll do that, and we'll figure out later who gets what. Most of this debt will be written off. So essentially,
is there anyone?
The reality, we got to save people, keep them in their home.
Yeah,
things moving.
Yeah, is there anybody with LaRouche PAC working with Trump right now, or working with the Trump administration?
Well, it's a battle, because the Trump administration is not just one thing. He's got contending forces in there, who want to keep control. I mean, he'll say one thing, and he'll have another guy say another thing, right? You've noticed that.
Sure.
He's made it clear, I'd like to work with Russia and China, and then he has Pompeo and Esper and others. He had to fire Bolton. We think he should fire Pompeo, because if you're going to work with these countries, you can't, simultaneously in a confrontation, and you also can't be protecting. I'll tell you the problem Trump has. It's the problem Lincoln had before the Civil War. You remember Lincoln's speech? He said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand, cannot be half slave and half free." We've been enslaved to this financial bubble for a long time, and a lot of people assume that's the way it is. You got to live with it. You can't. We got to free ourselves from it. Now, this crisis we're facing gives us an opportunity, both the financial crisis, the financial virus.
Yeah, it's kind of like a big financial Control-Alt-Delete. It should
control.
Yeah, it should allow us to reset this whole thing.
Break the control.
Right.
But I want to just introduce one thing, Brooks. I hope you don't mind my saying this, but I think, look, we're not going to resolve in this discussion. We're having all these problems. But if you have the right approach, people are in a dialogue and discussion about doing something different. You can move mountains or make miracles, as they say. So what the LaRouche movement is doing is we're going to have a conference online, obviously, internationally, on the 25th and 26th. We're inviting people. I'd invite all your listeners, yourself, anybody around the world. Get online. We're going to do this week from this weekend, the 25th and 26th.
Okay.
We're going to have 4 panels. One panel is going to be on this whole question of reorganizing the economy and discussing with nations how to put together a new system, which also means ending the danger of war, because that's
Sure.
part of this whole game.
Oh, yeah. How do we become part of the panel? How do we listen?
Yeah. And we're going to have people. We're not just talking to ourselves. We're actually in dialogue with other. We're going to have people from other countries there. We'll have people from various nations involved in these discussions at the, even on probably some government level.
How do people
diplomatic
participate?
level. Yes. Well, they can go to our website, which is www.LaRouche PAC, LaRouche, LaRouchePAC.com. And it's being sponsored actually by our international organization called the Schiller Institute, but the LaRouche PAC organization is supporting it. So anybody can go to LaRouche PAC, go to the conference. It says, New Paradigm Needed to Save Humanity. Because it's not just a technical issue, it's a different way of thinking.
Sure.
Like applying the American Revolution approach to the general welfare to the whole world. And so how do we work out common agreements among sovereign governments to defeat what people call the globalists, who would like to wipe out every government? So we're going to have a whole panel on reorganizing the economy. We're going to have another panel on dealing with this question of a healthcare system. How do you deal with this virus and any other emerging viruses? And how do we save people from what seems to be mass chaos and death, which is related to our economic capabilities? Because that to deal with medical care, you've got to have an economic mobilization.
Sure.
Especially if you're saying, in as bad as it is here in other countries, they may not even have health care because they were told by the IMF and World Bank, you got to cut public health, you got to cut public, hey, we have to test people. Well, we can't afford to do that. And they've been cutting all over the world. Look at Greece, look at Italy, look at Spain. The IMF and the EU system was telling them, you can't afford this, you've got to borrow more money, and we'll lend you the money to bail ourselves out. So we're going to have a whole panel on that. Then we're going to have a panel on the question of science and the discoveries that have to be made in the future, which means we need a real breakthrough, a space program. You need something to drive the economy forward. And then we're going to have a panel, people might be surprised at this, but on the question of culture, because you want to promote creativity. And Mr. LaRouche's view was that creativity in science is not deducing from known facts and just putting it all together, but making actual breakthroughs the way Einstein did, which is the same creativity in the cultural field, which is classical art, beauty. How do you promote human creativity? How do you uplift people? So we're calling for a classical renaissance.
Sounds like they need a copy of my new book, Asteroid Mining: The Future of Energy.
Okay.
I would love to participate in one or more of these panels. How do we do that?
Great. Excellent. Well, if you go to, there are two ways. One is go to our website, www.LaRouchePAC.com. Click on the link that says Conference for a New Paradigm, and just fill in the RSVP, and we'll be sending people updates. There's a form that says RSVP. There's no cost for the conference, but
Great.
We'd like to see how many people want to participate, and then we'll send you emails updating you and the list of the speakers and any material you can read beforehand, give you a better insight as to what's being discussed. And then we'll have speakers.
Physically, where is it going to be located? I know you can do it online, but there's going to be
it's going to be online.
Okay.
In other words, what we're going to do is we're going to be electronically bringing in people, through video from all over the world.
Okay.
So there's not going to be it's not going to be in any one physical location like most conferences, but it's going to be an online conference for obvious reasons. But now it's something that we can involve people who might actually who couldn't be involved because, they wouldn't be able to fly there or come there. But now you can get anybody. So we're going to have people online from all over the world, and we'll have these 4 panels. If people want to give me a call for any questions, I can give you my number, and they can call me if they want.
All right. When I'm on YouTube Live as well as being on Revolution Radio tonight. So there are those people listening by radio, but they're also watching my video right now. So I will put in the description right down here below when this goes up to record on YouTube. I will put the number in there, and I'll put this website in there, and that way we get in the next 72 hours, 1,000 or so people will watch this YouTube. So maybe we can build an audience for this.
They can participate by RSVPing, and then we'll give people updated details about the speakers and the conference. But the idea is to get a debate, and not just a debate, a dialogue, because it's obviously not the technicalities. There's something. How do you convince people to allow this to have occurred? Industry being shut down, manufacturing, science, technology, diseases spreading. And it's not like, by the way, these viruses weren't known.
Yeah.
LaRouche had warned this was the intention of these so-called globalist circles. They wanted to kill people.
Right.
They openly say we have to. I mean, remember what Prince Philip said? People might have thought it was a joke. He said, I'd like to be reincarnated as a deadly virus, and then I could deal with overpopulation. Where'd they come up with this idea of overpopulation? There's never too many people.
Well, maybe
it's all the creativity of human beings.
Maybe there is. Maybe they should leave first. I don't know. I don't know. I think the Earth, if it was properly managed, could support twice the number of people that live on it right now.
Easily.
But it's
we could support 10 times.
Sure.
Most of the Earth is underpopulated, has no people because we haven't developed it. But then you do have the rest of the solar system. Then you have other parts of the galaxy. I mean, there's no limit to growth.
Right.
This is what LaRouche kept insisting, that the human mind has no limits if we develop its creativity. That is the economy, the human mind. It's not the money. The money is just a mechanism to allow us to make inventions.
Correct.
And that's what we mean by a new paradigm, that it's not just the technical changes that are needed. We need a paradigm in the same way that you had a Renaissance that was reviving knowledge that had been lost in the Middle Ages, knowledge of discovery, and they were coming off of a dark age, which had killed, 1/3 of the people of Europe in the Black Plague, and they figured, well, gee, we have to do something different. I say right now, this is a wake-up call. We better do something different.
Well, I mean, I have people in the chat room talking about those very forces that would oppose this new paradigm.
Exactly.
You talk about the globalists. In my books, I call them the global syndicate, and they've been around for a long, long time. And
throughout history.
With the creation of America and the establishment of freedom and liberty and actually God-given rights instead of sovereign rights, the global syndicate kind of lost control of their world, and they have been trying to get it back ever since. And that's why I see
that's why they've been running all these operations to actually undermine things in the United States.
And it's not so much this virus. I call it Operation Corona Scare, because it could be any virus. But this methodology of changing the lower third of every single TV screen you see to read coronavirus pandemic over and over and over again to strike fear.
I would really urge people. You can look at it as a way of psychological warfare and create panic and hysteria. On the other hand, there really is a crisis. And if you really want to get panic, if we don't do anything and we actually will get something that comes back into the U.S. from other parts of the world, there's no reason for people to get frightened as long as we're taking the measures that are needed. What we've started to do, which I think Trump has done a pretty good job, but we actually have to go way beyond that. I mean, it is correct. Use the power of the government to get these factories open. Build the technology we need, like these ventilators. Use the Army Corps of Engineers. As one admiral said, who was the head of NATO, actually, Stavridis, he actually said in an interview, we could do miracles. There's no limit to what we could do except creativity and imagination. There's no limit to what we could do. I mean, they could fly hospitals all over the world. So I wouldn't downplay it. On the other hand, you don't want to use it just to get people hysterical and just looking at the how many people are dying. You want to actually figure out, okay, How do we solve the problem? What do we have to do? And that is what we should focus our economy on. Whatever we have to do to stop the immediate crisis and then build out of it a new economy.
Well, I know that there is a soft rebellion going on right now. People want to get back to work. They don't see a fatality rate to this virus that's altogether alarming. That's not any worse than any other flu that we faced before. It's just being marketed to us differently for a specific purpose.
Well, it is actually worse. No, look, it is actually 10 times more contagious than the flu. And if the death rate is 2%, well, then figure out how many people get infected with this. It could be a couple of million people in the U.S. alone.
Yeah, but
now,
but it's more like
once. It could be in waves.
Like,
it could come back. We don't know. But
it's more like 0.4%.
But on the other hand, I know people want to go back to work, but the fact of the matter is, it's not. We're just not going to go back to normal. If you wanted to get people back to work, and you wanted to make sure it was not continuing to spread again, you would have to make sure we had the testing, the screening capability, because anybody who had it, who was positive, you want to take out and quarantine. I'm serious. You would have to do that. And you'd have to make sure people had the equipment, the masks, the ventilators, and anything they needed.
Well, I think that generally speaking, you can't stop a virus. It's going to spread. That's what it does. What you can do,
mitigate it. You can mitigate it. It's true that it's going to spread, but on the other hand,
yes, you can mitigate it, but you got to let the body build its own antibodies. You can't create a vaccine for this virus, because if you do, there's just going to be another virus, and then another one, and then another one. And what you've done is you've created a multi-billion-dollar dependency upon the pharmaceutical industry again. And my point is, we are the cure. If you will let us build our own antibodies and keep us from getting mortally ill, you've got the best of both worlds.
Well, you better build up the economy to do that, because you have to raise people's standard of living to be able to be more immune to disease. In the immediate, I mean, we're not going to have to continue to do this for the rest of our life. I can guarantee you that, in terms of what you see right here.
True.
But in terms of preventing future viruses, you're right. You do have to build up your immune system. And the only way you could do that
is to get it.
You have to raise what's that?
Look what happened in Italy, in Lombardy, Italy. They asked for blood donations this week. 60 people showed up. 40 of them had the antibodies in their system, and they didn't even know it. They never got sick. They just built antibodies to the disease.
Well, this is good, but the fact is that there's a lot of things we don't know, because they're not even sure if everybody's going to build the antibodies who've gotten it. It's a lot of question marks. I'm not going to say I know all the answers. I don't, but we got to do a lot more than we've done. So I would say, before we go back to work, make sure we're on the road to rebuilding this economy, because even if you solve this virus in the U.S., the only way you could deal with it worldwide is you got to deal with the financial virus.
No doubt about it.
We got to change the whole. There's no one way you're going to solve it just by dealing with one aspect of this. That's why we're having this conference. Change the whole paradigm, the whole approach, and get rid of this idea that we have to have some financial mafia, or what you may call the globalist syndicate, the group of financial elites who think they run the world, and what they're afraid of is human creativity. That's why they want to get rid of people. That's why they say we have too many people. They figure if you have a small number of people, they can control them like slaves.
Yeah, well, you can't control a creative person, that's for sure. And
exactly. So we want to get more creativity. More people creative will come up with better answers.
I totally agree. Okay. All right.
So I would urge people, go to our website, call my number, and put it up there, and we will register you for the conference. You can just RSVP, and we'd like you to be part of this discussion.
Excellent.
April 25th and 26th, Saturday and Sunday, a week from this weekend.
I will post it. It will be on our website, and it will be on the YouTube as soon as this posts tonight, which will be in about 45 minutes. It'll
Great.
Upgrade.
Conference for a new paradigm to save humanity.
Excellent. Gerald, thank you so much for being on the program. You've been wonderful.
Thank you, Brooks. Good talking to you.
All right, same here. Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
All right, Earth Explorers. Wow, that was really something, wasn't it? I love the energy. I love the expertise. One thing I like about Gerald is he's got 47 years of working with LaRouche PAC, so he knows everything that's going on in the organization. He knows the legislation. He knows the effects of corporatism, globalism, the big players, the small players, and it was a tremendous honor to have him on the program. So we got about 20 minutes left. Keep putting your ideas in the chat room. I really appreciate that. I wanted to share something with you on this coronavirus. I looked up from some of the technical papers. Well, I know a lot of times you see these articles that come out, but then you go down in the references to the articles, you'll see a lot of really good technical papers. Now, many of you probably don't know how to read some of this stuff, and that's okay. I'll give you what I've got of it, and this is my basis for making the claim that Operation Corona Scare is worse as a weapon of fear than it is a weapon of illness. It could have been worse. It could have been a lot worse. But see, one of the diseases several of the diseases we know that we have already developed drugs for, one of them is malaria. Now, malaria still to this day remains a major public health problem. It results in, this is going to blow your mind, but it results in 207 million cases a year, 627,000 deaths worldwide in 2012. That's way, way more than we're ever going to see out of this flu. That's malaria. And for that, we already have drugs. There is no available vaccine for malaria, and the control of the disease relies on the use of bed nets, other individual protection against mosquito bites, and the successful drug treatment of infected patients. Presently, chemotherapy has been hampered by the low sensitivity of the parasite to most available anti-malarial drugs, including some of the artemisinin derivatives. I know you don't know what that is, and that's okay. We'll just skip through that. But there is a resistance to chloroquine. Okay, chloroquine. This is the core molecule to hydroxychloroquine. It's linked to mutations in the chloroquine resistance transporter gene. This varies from species to species and from human to human, but it has to do with the actual parasite itself, the actual malaria parasite itself. In the cell of a parasite, there are several structures. You got the nucleus, you have mitochondria, and you have something called a vacuole. A vacuole is like it's like an open space, except it performs a function inside the cell. And this is, for all intents and purposes, the digestive tract of the cell. It doesn't have a lot of function inside the cell, but doing that. So the resistance to, we'll call it CQ just to make it easy to understand, it's been described that it seems related to the intense malaria morbidity. In other words, its ability to kill in the Amazon region. However, neither the CQR nor mutation markers were detected among the 47 isolates from the West Amazon, all from patients with non-severe malaria. Now, you can use steroids, and one of the most common steroids for inflammation is prednisone. Myself, prednisone's valuable because it can be taken by nursing mothers with caution for premature infants, but prednisone can be taken by nursing mothers because it doesn't show up in the milk. Okay, so there's a barrier, and the only thing about prednisone for me personally is I'm affected with slight anxiety. In other words, it drives me nuts to take prednisone. If you've ever been through a treatment where the treatment itself will create some inflammation in your body, especially in the liver, when you get an inflamed liver, hepatitis, then you got a serious problem, because once your liver becomes inflamed, it can become diseased, and if it becomes diseased, it doesn't function anymore, and if your liver dies, you either need a transplant or you're going to die. So you take prednisone, and what it does, it simmers down the inflammation in the liver, allows the liver to function without getting inflamed, and you can get those bilirubin numbers. Those are the numbers that indicate if your liver's operating right or not. It'll get those bilirubin numbers back where they're supposed to be. You can take it orally, which is prednisone. Normally it's like, 10 tablets, then 9, then 8, then 7, until the bottle's gone. Or you can take the intravenous version of it, which is called solumetrol. It's way more effective, but of course then you got to take an infusion, which could take an hour or two to do. And solumetrol taken, every other day for a week will usually take care of hepatitis or inflammation of the liver. But you got to have access to a clinic to do that. So, quinacrine was widely used during World War II as an anti-malarial agent. Now, over the last 40 years or so, it has been used for the treatment of giardiasis, which is caused by the tiny bacteria called Giardia lamblia. I know you've heard of amoebic dysentery, right? That's a really nasty case of diarrhea that you get when you ingest an amoeba, and this amoeba gets into your intestines, and it basically strips the lining out of your colon, and everything you eat just runs right through you. So you can end up severely dehydrated, and you feel like you're going to die. Well, Giardia lamblia is a pesky little, about 1.5 micron bacteria, very, very small, that has gotten in virtually all the freshwater systems in America. So if you drink water from a surface stream in America without filtering it with a ceramic filter, you're going to probably ingest Giardia lamblia. Now, the difference in giardiasis is, instead of feeling like you're going to die, you wish you would die. That's how bad that infection is. So, quinacrine has been used since, last 30 years anyway, because in the last 20 years, Giardia lamblia has become much more widespread in North American streams. So trust me, you do not want to drink from a mountain stream without filtering it first. I don't care how clear that water looks. It's got Giardia lamblia in it, and drink it, you're going to get it. So, and it's not fun. I'm telling you, it's not fun. It comes on very, very quickly, fever and everything. So you want to make sure you filter that with a ceramic filter. Carbon filter is not going to get it. A regular fabric filter is not going to get it because it won't filter out down to 1.5 microns. A fabric filter, like, a straw filter or a gravity filter, is only going to get down to about 20 microns. Not going to get this bacteria. You got to have something like a catadine or a ceramic filter to get this bacteria out. Just for your information, campers, if you're out there doing it. Now, you can boil the water. That will kill it. That's fine. And then run it through a charcoal filter to take out any chemicals that might be in that water. But if you're going to drink cold water out of the stream, you have to filter it with a ceramic filter. Also, lupus. Okay, lupus erythematosus and rheumatoid arthritis. This is arthritis that is brought about in the joints that's caused by inflammation. It's painful. It can cause twisted joints. It's debilitating. It starts in the fingers and go to the elbows. It can debilitating. Make it where you can't even walk, or you can't even breathe. All of this can be treated with quinacrine because it is an effective anti-inflammatory with respect to that certain genetics of the parasite or the virus in this case. So in contrast with the situation in normal cells, it's usually constitutively active in the tumor cells, and it plays a key role in promoting tumorigenesis, which means growth of the tumor, including resistance to many cancer therapies. So what I have found in the papers that I've read is that hydrochloroquine, although it can cause tachycardia, which means a rapid heartbeat, and in some cases with people that are prone to what's called arrhythmia, that is normally have a nice heartbeat like boop, 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 right? You know that sound, like horror movies. Arrhythmia is where the valves of the heart tend to fight each other because there's a short circuit in the muscle of the heart itself, and the blood does not pump smoothly from one side to the other. It goes backwards through the heart and then forwards through the heart, and it can cause your oxygen level to drop, and it can make you kind of anxious. You'll feel it. When it happens, you'll feel it in your chest. You can get control of it with breathing and, relaxing and all that stuff. But, when you got an anxiety attack, arrhythmia can happen. So if you're adding tachycardia to that, that is to say rapid heartbeat, by adding hydrochloroquine to it, you've exacerbated that problem. It can be an issue if you're being treated at home. If you're being treated in the hospital, no big deal. They can put a pacemaker on that externally and get it right under control. All kinds of things, vasodilators that can be used to settle that down, as if you're being treated in the hospital. If you're being treated at home, it can be kind of scary. But that being said, the cool thing about this drug, hydrochloroquine, is it interrupts the protein in the macrophage. The macrophage is, as I've explained to you before, like this little guy right here. This isn't hydrochloroquine. This is R2D2. But when we're talking about a molecule, we're talking about a specially structured molecule that contains the DNA material inside, and it has a specific connector to it, and that connector connects to a specific biological receptor in the human body. In this case, it can be epithelial cells, which are rapidly growing cells on the lining of the mouth, inside of the nose, the eyes, and your gut. And these receptors hook up to this virus. The virus hooks up. The virus then injects, it injects the DNA straight into the cell. It hijacks the replicative powers of that cell and makes more viruses. And so more macrophages go out. And out they go, and they hook up to more cells. And the thing about these little beggars is they're not really alive, these macrophages, but in the sense that they don't respirate, they don't eat, they don't breathe, they don't excrete anything, but they're very smart. They have a program, like an electronic program that's written in the code. And once that macrophage connects up with a cell, the program runs. And when it runs, it makes more macrophages. Now, when these things are free-floating and you're coughing them out and you're leaving them on sinks and toilet covers and doorknobs everywhere and gasoline pump handles, is they're picked up by another person on the outside of the hands. They're kind of harmless, not going to get through the skin too easy. But if you rub your eye or pick your nose or lick your finger, boom, they're on the epithelial cells, and here we go to town. And all it takes is a couple in your system and you're infected. And that's how these little guys are so aggressive. Now, the thing is, they could float around in your system and you can be what's called asymptomatic. In other words, your eyes are not watering, your nose isn't running, you're not coughing, you haven't developed a fever. Enough of them have not divided in your system to make you symptomatic. In other words, your body hasn't gone into a massive histamine reaction trying to fight the little beggars off. That doesn't mean you're not contagious. You are, and that's the danger of this virus. As it spreads, of course, the body immediately recognizes it as a foreigner, and the T cells go into action and start building antibodies against it. Unfortunately for human physiology, that process is kind of slow. The T cells are a little sluggish doing their thing. They can take hours or days to build up enough antibodies to seriously combat this thing. These little macrophages, in the right conditions, they can divide about every 15 to 20 minutes in the right conditions. If it's the wrong conditions, you can slow it down. In other words, if your pH is off or your salinity is off or you're not hydrated well enough, all kinds of things can affect the rate at which this virus advances in your system. Once it gets into the lungs, which does not take long, once it gets into the mucous membranes, your mucous membranes begin to push out mucus. The mucus goes into the sinuses, down the throat. Next thing you know, it's in your esophagus. You've ingested it into your lungs, and the lungs go into an inflammation histamine reaction, and your lungs flood with mucus. When they flood with mucus, the pneumococci, which is a bacteria that exists in almost everyone's lungs, begins to bloom. It blooms, it attaches itself to the sides of the lungs and begins to scar the lungs, create pus, and the poison goes into your blood system, and now you've got a real problem. This is the danger of the disease, is the virus sets you up for a pneumonia that is a pneumonia from hell. And if you're over 65 years of age and your lungs have taken a spanking, lots of smoking, other bouts with pneumonia, bronchitis, asthma, COPD, all this kind of stuff exacerbates the situation, allows the pneumococci to take you over, and in literally 72 hours you can have a case of pneumonia that's mortal. You can fight it off. Chances are you won't. You're going to have antibacterial help, perhaps steroidal help, either inhaled or injected somehow to get the inflammation down and be able to fight this thing off. You might even need a blood transfusion. There are lots of things that can go wrong. The nice thing about hydrochloroquine is 98% of the people could take it without any issue. Hundreds of millions of doses of this stuff have been given. People that have lupus, people that have rheumatoid arthritis, people that have malaria have been taking this drug for almost 50 years. It doesn't kill a lot of people. It does treat these other diseases. As I said, what did I say? 207 million cases and 627,000 deaths worldwide in 2012. That's malaria. That's a major public health problem. That's 2012. That's not 1932 or 1965. That's 2012. That's like just a little bit ago in modern healthcare systems. So it's a serious disease. And this is a serious drug that's used to treat that disease. It doesn't cure it. There's no vaccine for malaria. You're treated lifetime for malaria. You have it forever. Okay, it's very difficult to get cured of malaria. You have bouts of malaria once you're infected with it, and it's spread by mosquitoes. So this is the beauty of the system. This is why we work so hard on it, and this is why I think it's interesting and it's I think successful. But I still think that Operation Corona Scare took advantage of this and they have used it to crush the Trump economy. I think the Trump economy could have done just fine. There are other ways we could have done this beside a complete, total economic shutdown, because I believe that once we discovered that we have these effective drugs, 98% of the people respond to. Once you develop symptoms, you immediately get this $15 dose of hydrochloroquine and Z-Pak, and 99.5% of the people are going to respond fine to that. So you got somewhere around 0.04 to 0.4% of the people that are going to have a real serious time with this. And I think our healthcare system is set up to deal with that level of illness. It's not set up to do what we're trying to do right now. I don't know that we need more than 1 bed per 1,000 people. I don't think we need 4.5 beds per 1,000 people. I don't think it's sustainable when people are healthy and things are going well. Just my thoughts. So this is X Squared Radio. We're live to you on the America Free Radio System on the Revolution Radio Network on freedomslips.com. Again, this is the #1 listener-supported network in the country. Listener-supported means you. You should go to revolutionradio.com or freedomslips.com. Click on the donate button. Make it a regular thing. $1 or $2 a month will go a long way to keeping an operation like this, keeping the truth come to you. Thanks again to Gerald Belsky for coming on the program with LaRouche PAC. I will put the links in the description right down below. Share it with your friends. Don't forget to turn your notifications on. We'll see you next week right here.